Hello guys, in this video I'm going to show a demo application on OAuth 2.0 protocol implementation authorization code grant type. So when we are implementing the OAuth 2.0 protocol, we have need to consider the resource owner, client app, authorization server and the resource server. So before going to see deeper, I'm just explaining this picture what is happening in OAuth 2.0. Resource owner as the end user like us, they need to use some client applications. It's known as a third-party client application, and the third-party client applications need some user credentials in order to provide their services. So each time the client using the resource owners using the client applications, it's hard and it's time consuming to provide their user credentials again and again and separately registering. So it has the small kind of clients apps are having some authorization protocols such that OAuth 2.0 in order to get the authorization facilities to get that user resources without the user interactions. So here the resource owner is willing to use a client app, and the client app need the authorized permissions from the authorization service server to get the user resources. So when the resource owner is requesting the client app will go to the authorization server in order to get the authorization code. This is known as the authorization endpoint. So in this time the authorization server cannot give the access authorization code by itself because it needs some user permissions to give this authorization code. So it will request the user, are you willing to give permission for this client app to access your resources? That is we known as the user consent page. And after user giving the user access permission, it will send the access authorization code to the client application. So now the client application is having the authorization code. So by using the authorization code, it can request an access token which contain the privilege to access the resources. And the special thing, when providing this authorization code, there are some scope and the access privileges limited for this client application. So by to access the access token, it will again send the authorization code to the authorization server. It's known as the redirection endpoint, and the authorization server will validate the authorization code and provide it the access token again to the client app. And the last thing is the client app got the access token and it will move to the resource server in order to get the resource. But the resource server cannot give directly the resources to the client app. It also needs to verify the access token is a valid one and what are the access privileges and the scopes are defined for this client app. After analyzing these kinds of things, then only it will providing the resource to the client application. So this is the process actually happening inside this OAuth 2.0. So I can classify them into 4 steps. One is registering the debug friends finder app in debug authorization server. So the thing is registering the client app. Here the debug friend finder is my client app and debug authorization server is the server. The second step is obtaining the authorization code, as I said earlier, and by using the authorization code, obtaining the access token, and finally by having the access token we can retrieve the user resources. So before moving into this program, I prefer to have some brief introduction on OAuth 2.0, you can have some ebooks as well as the internet resources to get some ideas, or else there are some links which I have prepared based on the OAuth protocols. So in order to run these applications, I need Apache Tomcat server, Java-Maven-Spring Boot, and I am using IntelliJ IDE. And here I need to implement the resource owner, server, and the client app. So server is containing two parts. One is authorization server and resource server. Here the debug is a name I gave for my server, and the debug friends finder is a client app name. So, and the resource owner is the single person who needs to access the client applications is here. I have given his name as Ben and his password is 123. So in the server it has some two parts, and I am separating them by using two different ports. For the authorization server of the debug, I am using 9998 port, and for the debug resource server I am using 9997 port, and for the client app I am using the localhost 9999. So the first thing is we need to register our client, third-party client application to the authorization server in order to give a function. That means in order to provide the facilities. So let's see let's see our source code. So here I have implemented authorization server, client app, and resource server. So I will move step by step what I have did here. So the client app here, for the client app we need to develop the class as well as the client side and the server side. So in the server side we are having some Java functions, and in the client side just the browser interface here. So it's okay to have some look, it's easy to understand you for the HTML page. So I'm just moving to the Java. So in the app controller Java you can see I have mapped the root path to the index.html. So this client app is registered for this port 9999 of the local host. So when this port is called in root, this will redirect to the index.html page. So before to get this output, as I use the Spring Boot and I'm using the Maven, we need to start the server. So here this is my terminal, and I have split that into three parts. I have separately opened the destinations of authorization server, the client application, and the resource server. In order to start these servers, just type mvn spring boot run, and for the client application as well. For the first time you are running this application, it may take some time because it needs to download some dependencies, especially for the authorization server. It will consume much time. So just right, I have started all the servers here, and let's move to the localhost. The localhost 9999 is for our client side application, and this is my client side application. I'm not developing the client side, but I need to show the OAuth 2.0 protocol flows. So this kind registrations may be asked by the third-party client applications, and if you are already registered you will have some login functions as well, the client side applications. So in order to have this login with debug, the debug is a main server. It's like Facebook and Twitter or some LinkedIn. That's such kind of servers which is containing the user resources. And this is a small app, debug friend finder. So this needs some authorization from the debug server to access the user resources. So in order to create this kind of button, it needs to register himself to the debug's authorization server. So that's the thing I am saying here is the first thing is registering the debug friend finder app in debug authorization server in order to use this button login with debug. Without registering, we can't able to use this button login with debug. So when we are registering, we will get two main things. One is the client ID and the client secret. The client secret should be kept secretly by the third-party developers, because it's something, if the secret is open, then there is no use for this app. So here in the code, I'm just implementing the client app things only, but the actual thing, the client ID and the client secrets should be saved in the authorization server of the debug. So let's run the program. What is here? So I'm just clicking login with debug, and it will go to another localhost. See here, it's a localhost 9999. Then I log in with debug, it will redirect this one to localhost 9998. So auth login. So as I said in the as I shown in the flow of the auth, this authorization server is need to ask the user permission to provide the authorization code to the client app. So in order to prompt the user consent page, the user needs to log into the debug, that means that server. So that's the reason it's asking the login page here. So if it's as a huge server, it will contain many resource owners. So it also needs a complex one to keep a separate database and their user credentials. But here, to show the flows, I have just hard-coded the user details here. For an example, in authorization server, the thing is, I have already said in my documentation, I am using this localhost 9998 for the authorization server. So the code is also in authorization server. So in the Java, an auth configuration, and an authorization server, these are the security configurations. So these are the files I have in Java class files I have implemented in the authorization server of the debug. So here you can see when this login function is executed in this URL, you can see there's auth login. When this path is called, this will automatically create this kind of interface by using the Spring Boot and some other imported auth classes. It will automatically generate and display this kind of interface, and I have hard-coded the username and the password and the role of the user as well. So because the system needs to know the access privileges in order to provide the access also. So the real thing is, this will be stored in a database and it needs to be connected with the database. When after providing the user credentials, it needs to be checked with the database, and if it's satisfied only, we have need to provide the next step. So I have just hard-coded here because I just need to demonstrate the auth 2.0 flows only. So I am giving the user credentials as I gave. So after I gave the user credential as what I told here, the authorization server will prompt a user consent page to the resource owner in order to get the user permission to provide the authorization code to the client app. Requesting the authorization code should be done by the client application to the authorization server authorization endpoint. So this request should be done in HTTP GET request, and this request needs to carry some parameters in order to ensure that this is a registered app, as well as its scope, what are the access privileges it needs to access the user resources. So these kinds of informations are need to be sent in the HTTP GET request in order to get the authorization code by the authorization endpoint in the authorization server. So in the application URL, you can see there's a URL. This is running here in the authorization server, and have some parameters called response type code. Here means the response is as a request. Your server response should be replied in a code way and in this code variable. And the client ID of the application is saying that I am a registered application, and the authorization server is also can check whether this is a registered application or not. The redirect URL is the place where we need to get the response. The request is sent by the client, so the response is also received by the client. So you can see here the localhost 9999 is a client application port. So in the auth/access place, it will respond, the authorization server respond to the client. So here the second parameter is key is a value, and scope, which are the access permissions needed by this third-party client applications in order to access the resources. So here there are two scope provided by this client application. One is debug user read and debug user write. So let's see where I hard-coded this request. So this is an authorization server place. So in security configuration Java, now this is a client request. So let's see in the client application Java app press controller. Here you can see this URL, what is in the application server. So this is sending to the localhost 9998, which is the authorization server, and as I said, these are some parameters containing the response type and the client ID, redirect URL, and the localhost, that means a redirect URL to the client side localhost 9999, and the scope of that server. So this is the place where I hard-coded the authorization code request, and this wants to be in HTTP GET request. And here there's a number called this one 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9. This is the third party, that means debug friend finder third party client application client ID. So this also needs to be developed in the authorization server. So here in this auth configuration Java file, you can see I gave this number, and this is a client ID, and this is a client secret manually. The reason is I've just need to show the OAuth 2.0 flows, but in real cases there are many client apps needs to access the resources, and they are registered with this authorization server. So there are many data of the client ID and the client secrets as well. So it's in real way it's stored in a database, and this kind of IDs, secret and the public IDs, are auto generated by the authorization server, and it will define some scopes, which are the scopes that are only accessible by the client applications, because some applications are not allowed to have some access privileges or scopes, or some kind scopes are restricted for the client applications to access the resources. So here these things are really auto generated and they are not stored in the database. But here I am not connecting with the database, I am just manually hard coding this kind of informations. So that's the thing, is asking in the user concern page to the user, are you allowing this client ID app to access your protected resources? And this is the request, HTTP GET request to the authorization endpoint of the authorization server by the client application. And these are the parameters in the HTTP GET request towards the authorization endpoint, and it will contain the redirect URL to get the response to the client. This is 99.99. So let's authorize this one. Yeah, right, we are directly accessing the resources. The thing is, the other part which I have mentioned in this flow are done in back end, because what are the things they're done in backend is the authorization server provide the authorization code, and it will redirect the authorization code to get the access token, and after getting the access token it will get the resources. That's the output of this one. So up to that part is done in a short time, but we need to code them. So let's see, after getting the access token, how we get the access token. So according to our request, HTTP GET request to the authorization endpoint, it will have some response, and we have to extract the value from the code, because as we requested here, response type is in code. So we are going to get the code. In this URL you can see the application, this is the URL what we gave for the redirection for the authorization code. So this is the response of the authorization server with the authorization code. So here this is the code parameter carrying the authorization code, right? So this authorization code needs to be extracted, and I am storing that in the auth code variable, string auth code variable, and then we need to make the request is a HTTP post request to the authorization server, again to the redirection endpoint, in order to get the access token. So this needs to be sent to the authorization server, so 99.98, and it will contain a parameter called grant type authorization code, and the code is equal to what we get from the code parameter that will stored in the auth code variable. And this wants to be in post request, and as a post request it will contain some header files. So here for my applications I am using two headers. So one header is for provide the authorization, and one is for providing the content type access. So like the request done to get the authorization code, the client app again needs to give a request to the redirection endpoint of the authorization server in order to get the access token. So this is HTTP post request is having one parameter. No, it's having some parameters same as the HTTP get request what we made before. So it's contain the grant type. It's authorization code grant type because we are giving the code here. It's a client ID to ensure that our client application is a registered app. The redirection URL is okay, it's fine. It's the place where we are sending. So as a post request, it contains some headers. One is authorization header and the content type header. The authorization header will need to authorize the app. That means with the secret key, because the secret key is the only authorization part of the application, but the third-party client app can't share the secret key openly to the server, so it needs to be encoded with the base 64. So here this authorization header wants to be filled with client ID colon client secret. It's like this kind of format, and after getting this kind of format we are going to put in the function of base 64 and it will have some output like this. So create a header file called authorization and basic space and what the value we got from the base 64 encoded. And the second header is content type, and its value is application/xww from URL encode. So this request is sent to the redirection endpoint of the authorization code. So here this is the part, this is a function which is getting the access token and it's sending to the authorization server containing with the grant type authorization code and the authorization code what we received and the two headers we have to set. After requesting this one, it will respond the access token. The access token response is extracted by the JSON, and I'm assigning this into the access token variable. So the actual thing is, when we are seeing this log file, this first section is for the authorization server, and the middle one is client, and last one is the resource. So when we are seeing these authorization server log files, we can see there are some tokens sent and created. So this is the access token which is generated by the authorization server and provided to the client server. So this token needs to be extracted by a JSON object. So here that's why I'm creating an object and I'm extracting an access token and I'm assigning it to the access token variable. So according to the flow, now we got the authorization code and the access token. So the client app is now having the access token and it can directly communicate with the resource server. So this is the code communicating with the resource server. This is a get resource and this is the path. This is also a request to the resource server, and this request must be in a get way, HTTP get request. So this request carry the localhost 9997, which is the port of the resource server, and it will contain a header, authorization header, with the value bearer and the access token which is extracted from the first request response, which I have used this JSON object to extract this access token. By using this get request, it will the client app send the request to the resource server, and this access token have the scope, and according to that scope the resource server will send the JSON object. So in the log file you can see the JSON object which is responded by the resource server to the client request by using this access token. So in order to get a suitable way to interpret this one, I have created a small HTML type in a string. So this is a inbuilt CSS, so no need to be worry about. So I have just assigning this all thing in the JSON array, and after assigning this all the output in the JSON array, then using for loop I am extracting this JSON array and display it in a table that is look like this one. This is the thing. So directly when the user provide this authorized one, we will getting the resources. That is in graphical way what we are seeing outside, but in the backend there are some huge process, such as after getting this authorization code, it will need to request the access token, and after getting the access token needs to be sent to the resource server in order to get the resource, and the resource server needs to communicate with the authorization server in order to check the validity and the scope what this access token is having, and based on the scope and the validity it will reply to the client app with the resources. So this process is happening in the backend. So this request, the first request can be seen by our browser, and other two request response are here in this server log files. So this is what happening in the OAuth 2.0 protocol. The one thing I have missed is the scope. The resource server, which is containing the resources of the debug server, I have declared some 3 classes, resource server classes, the user Java and the user data Java. So the user Java file, I am providing the functions how the response with the user data, and the resource server is defining the scope, that the keyword of the scope. For an example, this is a scope, debug public read is a scope keyword, and it's separately defined for the each HTTP functions. HTTP type, for an example, it can be a HTTP get function and it can be a HTTP post function. And this is the second scope, user read, debug user read, and it's also separately for get and post, and user read for get method, post method for write. Because the main thing is we need to separately define for each HTTP request, because some requests no need to have some other attributes of the resources. Here I am saying this all 3 resources are for this put request of the scope, debug user write, but sometimes it's okay to have only 2 things, ID and name. So this is the controlling part of the this is the controlling part, and it's by having this access keyword only the client apps can access the resources. And the last thing is user data Java. It's a kind of database, but I have hard coded this one because I no need to have a bunch of data. I'm just demonstrating the OAuth 2.0 protocol only. So I am saving this sample data manually to the user.dat file, and I am creating a user objects, and I am assigning it to the list, and after this one I am interpreting it according to the request, because as previously, as our request is user read and write, so I have the access to read and write the ID, name and the profession, so it's directly displaying the output as what are the data I gave manual hard coded to the user.data.java file. So this is the basic flow, and this is happening. This is what happening in the OAuth 2.0 protocol, and I have used this Java and Maven Spring Boot in order to develop this kind of flows. So I hope you will understand about the OAuth 2.0. If you have any doubt and any clarifications, you can comment it to me to the blog as well as for my video. And all source codes I have designed is available in the GitHub, and the link is also provided. Thank you. Have a nice day.